Remember when games actually challenged you, weren't afraid to offend, and weren't built to please everyone? No microtransactions, relentless ads, and of course, no identity politics. Yeah, those were the days. Back then we had next to no walkthroughs, no endless tutorials, websites weren't spruiking the perfect build for your character, whatever game you're playing. Just you, the game, and a world to explore. Sound familiar? Well, let me tell you why games were better 20 years ago. I remember back then, games looked to have a clear audience in mind. They weren't trying to appeal to everyone, and that's what made them stand out. Every title was designed for a specific group of players, whether they love fighting games, races, shooters, RPGs, whatever took their fancy. Take the arcades of the 90s and early 2000s, for example. Arcades were a battleground of genres, but each one targeted specific tastes. Fighting games were a huge draw card. You had a variety of styles, from the brutal fatalities of Mortal Kombat to the technical finesse of the Street Fighter series, as well as the combo system of Killer Instinct and games that followed on from that system. And if fighting games weren't your thing, of course there were racing games like Daytona and Ridge Racer, which offered high-speed thrills, and Time Crisis and Virtua Cop brought intense school-based shooting action. Even today, some of these games are still staples in arcades that I've seen around the place, proving their everlasting appeal with gamers even today. But of course, it wasn't just the arcades. Consoles and PCs were brimming with iconic titles, such as Mario for Nintendo, Halo for the Xbox, Grand Theft Auto on PC, as well as StarCraft, Warcraft, etc. in the evolution of World of Warcraft. And each of these was made with a deep understanding by studios of what fans of these franchises actually wanted from their gaming experiences. And the reason behind that was these titles weren't trying to please everyone. Studios knew their fan bases and they doubled down on what worked. When people bought games from certain studios, they knew exactly what they were getting and that it was tailored to their tastes and expectations. But have a look at the gaming scene today. Yeah, we've got an overwhelming amount of indie titles and AAA releases, but it feels like so many studios have simply just lost their way. Acquisitions, shareholder pressure, and yes, of course, the injection of identity politics have led to a lot of once great studios making bland, safe games. And while we make fun of studios like EA and Activision churning out yet another reskin version of FIFA or a Call of Duty game, the studios that create these are ultimately still catering to their respective fan bases and delivering experiences that they want. Even if they rarely try anything new and still charge $60+ for the privilege of playing almost the exact same game as their predecessor just 12 months earlier. But many other new releases, however, feel like they're trying to cater to everyone, but in reality, they end up appealing to literally no one. When you aim for the modern audience without even knowing who that is, it's no surprise that studios are collapsing. A game for everyone is simply a game for no one. To survive, studios need to remember what made them great in the first place, understanding their audience, and delivering what those players actually want. Don't be afraid to try something new, however, remember what made a game successful at its core and build off of that. Don't just slap a name of a beloved franchise on a game that clearly isn't something the fanbase wants, simply because you're far too scared to create a new IP in case it fails. Having said that, the complete and utter failure of Concord will of course only exacerbate the new issue of new IPs, so unfortunately we can expect even more beloved franchises to be completely butchered in the future. But for me personally, one of the most memorable things about gaming 20+ years ago was the lack of readily available walkthroughs and tutorials. You couldn't just jump online the moment you got stuck, and that's what made them so rewarding. You had to figure things out for yourself using your own wits and perseverance, because the temptation to look up a walkthrough just simply didn't really exist due to how difficult it was at the time to get access to the internet and try and find them to help you out and work your way through games. So you just had to do it yourself. And of course, the games back then just didn't hold your hand at all. You were dropped into the action almost immediately, and it was up to you to figure out the mechanics, uncover the secrets, and solve the puzzles. Whether you were platforming in Super Mario 64, surviving the zombie apocalypse in Resident Evil, or trying to complete every quest in Final Fantasy game, the lack of extensive tutorials forced you to think, experiment, and adapt. Sure, there might have been a brief explanation of how to use a new ability when you obtained it, but figuring out when to use it, that was purely up to you. Having said that, walkthroughs and strategy guides did exist for sure, but as I mentioned before, they weren't easy to access. If you got stuck, you mainly had two options. Either work it out for yourself, or wait until the next issue of your gaming magazine hit the shelves in your local news agency. There was a third option. Call the hotline, whichever console or company that you are playing on, and pay the exorbitant phone bill to a guy who could hopefully give you the answers you were looking for.
Gameplay.
Hi, Nintendo. This is Craig. How can I help you?
Yes. I was want to inquire about The Legend of Zelda. I was wondering how you go about getting the white sword.
So it was a unique experience at the time, albeit an expensive one that your parents wouldn't be very happy with if you weren't paying the phone bill. But, the lack of guidance, in my opinion, was actually a really good thing, because it's what made the games last. You weren't just finishing them in a weekend and then moving on. The process of discovery added so much more to the longevity of a game because you weren't simply breezing through it with a walkthrough in hand. A recent experience of mine with a friend that I had was playing Sons of the Forest. And we played just after the early access release, and I really enjoyed it, but the game content was a bit sparse, and we decided to look up a walkthrough, and I'd say we breezed through it in about 4 hours and haven't gone back to the game since, which is a real shame because it's a good game. I will go back to it, but that's one example for me personally in recent times that we did the temptation to go through with a walkthrough just to further our game a bit, and we ended up finishing it within a day. Haven't gone back to it since. So there's just one example of probably many that people tend to experience these days, and on to the next game. Nowadays, nearly every new game is filled with tutorials, bright markers pointing to exactly where you need to go, and constant reminders of what to do next. The excitement of finding something on your own is mostly gone, which has been replaced by a barrage of hand-holding that quickly makes the game feel stale. Completing a game now feels more like ticking off a list of chores than actually achieving something meaningful and fulfilling. Now, back then, the reward was in the discovery itself. Figuring out a difficult section or uncovering a hidden area made these games memorable. Every new location opened up new enemies, new secrets, and a sense of unknown adventure of what was going to happen next. Was there a legendary item waiting for you? Or some hidden danger ready to just end your progress altogether? That feeling of unpredictability, the thrill of the unknown, added so much to the overall experience that you just don't get already knowing what's going to happen when it comes up ahead of you. But back in the day, games tend to push boundaries a lot more than they do currently, so they didn't shy away from controversies. Like I said, they pushed boundaries, they took risks, they were willing to offend, all while providing something genuinely unique. Whether it was with the graphic violence, dark humour, or over-the-top themes, developers weren't afraid to step on a few toes to deliver a memorable gaming experience. And on that, they weren't about being safe or trying to appeal to the widest possible audience. Instead, they thrived on niche appeal and bold decisions from the developers. This was an area where the same developers could create games for specific groups, knowing that not everyone had to like it, and that of course is perfectly fine. Games like Postal 2 and Grand Theft Auto had many themes and acts that could be committed in-game that would be absolutely abhorrent to many industry pundits today and would cause an absolute storm on social media, especially Twitter. But that's what made them so enjoyable and fun. But it wasn't just about being offensive for the sake of it. These risks paid off because they offered something different that you simply couldn't get from a more polished, family-friendly game. The risk-taking in both content and gameplay gave these titles a distinct edge that players simply gravitated towards. Contrast that with today's gaming landscape, where big studios seem terrified of offending anyone. Controversy is avoided at all costs where possible, and the result is often a watered-down, safe product. Games are made to appeal to as many people as possible, but in doing so they lose all the boldness that made older games of previous generations stand out. Back then, it simply felt like games had more freedom. Developers took bigger swings and sometimes hit even bigger. Now, not every risk paid off, but when it did, it certainly resulted in an unforgettable game experience. These days, you can't help but feel like something's being lost, as more and more studios simply play it safe. And looking back, it's clear to me why games were better 20 years ago. They were made for specific audiences, not for everyone, which allowed developers to create something truly unique and tailored to those gamers they were targeting. Games weren't afraid to push boundaries, whether through controversial content or bolder design choices, and that simply made them stand out. And most importantly, you had to figure things out for yourself. There was a sense of discovery that modern games, with all their hand-holding and guides, simply just cannot replicate anymore. Today's games may have better graphics and bigger budgets, but the magic of creating for a target audience, taking risks, and rewarding players for their curiosity is what made older games so much more special. It's why they've stood the test of time, and why, for many of us older generation, gaming was just simply back in the day. If you're still here, guys, really appreciate you watching all the way to the end of the video. If you'd like to see more of my content, please hit the subscribe button and give me a thumbs up, and please feel free to leave a comment. I'd like to see what you think, and if you think games were better back in the day, or if they've improved and you enjoy them more now. Otherwise, look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye for now.